Going. And we're live.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to week 6 of Cindy B's Sew Along 2023. I've been loving the pictures that you're being posting on our Facebook group. If you haven't been over there, check them out. I just love seeing all the different colors and things that people are doing. It's going to be exciting to see the finished project. Also, while we are here on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe and comment where you're from. We love to hear from you. And it's kind of surprising sometimes where everybody is. So it's really nice to hear from you. So let's get started. So I thought this week, because we always like to accomplish something and we're kind of like halfway through, so we're going to make our little stars. This morning, we had the fabric requirements for the border strips, and that was out of Fabric B. That's our second background. So we've got those cut. And then we've made all our units previous to this. So let's just move this board. And I have taken and I have laid them all out in the way that they're supposed to go. And I have them in piles of 2 because I'm only doing the lap quilt for this. So I only have to make 2 blocks. If you are doing the other sizes, then you will have to be either making 6 for the queen, the double, or 9 for the queen. And you can have them all stacked up and you can chain piece. Things go much faster. And if you don't know what chain piecing is, I am going to show you. I am just trying to find a piece of fabric here. I only have this teeny tiny little one. And I'm going to start what we call, have you ever heard of leaders and enders? I really want to start when I'm sewing. So I'm going to sew that I'm just past this little scrap piece of fabric. I'm going to sew with my needle in the down position. So now when I'm chain piecing, I will have this piece of fabric to hold my threads. It does 2 things. It holds them so you don't get that rat's nest in the bottom, but you also end up using a little bit less thread because we don't have those long tails that we keep having to cut off. So we're going to go back to our block and I'm going to start chain piecing. So I am going to take this middle row and I'm going to take the square and I'm going to close it like a book and I'm going to sew here. When I'm putting my blocks together, if I just pick them up and put them like this and turn them around onto my quilt, I'm liable to sew on the wrong side. So if we always get into the habit of taking the one on the right, putting them right side together with the one on the left, and this is the seam that I'm going to sew right here. We do not have any seams that are matching, so that's great. I can put a pin in here, or you could use the seam-align glue if you like, and we're going to sew. I just want to make sure that my edges are all lined up. Again, I've put my thread length, my stitch length down to 2.0. We don't want to back stitch at the sides of our blocks because it gives too much bulk, too much thread buildup. So that's why we lower our stitch. So it's going to get locked in by the next seam. So now that I have that little guide there, it's also going to help me because of the way the block is. I've got a seam right at the top. I could flip it over if I wanted to, but I like keeping them all arranged. So if my sewing machine is in tip-top shape, it won't mind doing that. So I've lifted my foot and I am taking my fabric and butting it up just almost at the ruler. I'm sorry, almost at the needle. And I have the edge of my block right along the edge of my 1/4 inch. And I'm going to take about 2 or 3 stitches. I'm going to stop with my needle in the down position. And now I'm going to make sure that my block is all aligned, that my seams, my edges are aligned up perfectly. And I'm also going to make sure that the seam that's underneath is pointing in the proper direction. So I'm going to sew, and I'm going to sew 1 stitch off of the block. I'm just going to leave it there, and that's going to hold my threads for my next block. So I can continue on doing the whole pile if I wanted. But today I'm just going to go to the second piece. So again, I'm going to take my unit on the right, flip it over to the unit on the left, and I am going to sew those two together. I am not going to pin this one, just to show you that because there's no seams that I have to match, I don't necessarily pin, but I always check it. I will take my 2 or 3 stitches. Here's a really good point. We have a seam going right up into the corner. If your sewing machine is struggling to get through that seam, chances are you might need a new needle. So, or if it's trying to stick that corner down inside your sewing machine, change your needle and go slowly, and that will help you get along to the edge. Let me just fix my iron here. So now that I've got it locked with those 2 stitches, I'm again going to double check this edge. I am going to pinch this with my finger, and I am not going to let that slide. So as I'm saying I don't pin, I really am, but I'm pinning with my fingers. I'm going to hold it on the bed of my sewing machine, and I'm going to hold it on this side, making sure that that corner stays right close to my foot, wherever it's supposed to be for your 1/4 inch.
Where's your purple thing?
I do have a purple thing. Where did it go? I had it. Oh, here it is. You can also use your purple thing, and I'll show you on this block. Again, one on the right, close it like a book to the one on the left. We're going to pick this up. I've got a few seams that I'm going to play with here that I have to worry about. So I am going to put a pin just to keep that aligned. All righty. Again, butting it up to the needle, taking my 3 stitches. I'm going to use my purple thing. I'm going to make sure that this is out like this, and I can hold this really great. At this point, I can see that I have a seam allowance. Sometimes your foot wants to catch it. So I'm to the place where I have to take my pin out. I am going to hold this with my purple thing, and I can sew nice and slow and guide it through that it doesn't want to go sideways. Because there was a seam there, it's really going to want to shift. So I can take this out. Sorry. Oopsie. Now that everybody's got vertigo and thought they fell on the floor. And I have no scissors.
You have a cutter on the side of your
But I
sewing
do have a
machine?
cutter on the side of my sewing machine. I was going to take it all the way out, but I will. So we have my little leader here. I'm just going to stick that back in, and I'm going to sew back over. Now it's ready to go for my next row. So there's 2 things that we could do here. Some people like to just open these up and keep them sewed together, keep them attached. Some people like to cut them off at this point. I don't know what we should do. What should we do? You probably may not have ever seen this method, so why don't I just leave them attached? If you're going to cut them off, I would cut them and I would lay them back down on my mat so I know that they're going in the right direction. I know this was my top because that was the piece that my little leader was on. So all I have to do now is grab the whole unit. Now I'm going to take this one here, my last row. I'm going to fold it over to the middle block. I am going to put a pin because there is a seam there. I want to make sure my pin's going in the right direction.
Your seam is going in the right direction?
Yeah, my seam down here. I lost my purple thing again. There it is. The seam on the bottom, on the piecing from the other side, I want to make sure that it stays in the direction that I actually ironed it. Sometimes it'll catch on the machines and want to flip in the other direction. So I want to make sure that it stays where I'm supposed to have it. Because there's a seam here, it's automatically going to want to bow. So I want to just align that right back up for the edge. And I'm going to hold down my seam allowance again with my purple thing. I'm going to sew along. This shifted on me. Just a minute. Let me get that back into place. I hope everybody had a wonderful March break. Kitties are back to school today. So in my second row, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to take my middle piece on my right, flip it to the left. I am just going to pin this. Again, pins are our friends. I don't pin all the time, but when I'm putting together rows, I do like to pin quite a bit. Butt it up to my needle. Around. This one's just not quite lined up. I'm going to fix that. Now that I found my purple thing, it works so much nicer. And my final little corner right here. Again, we're going to flip that over. If I don't want to pin it, I don't have to, but I'm lining this corner up perfectly. I'm going to take about 2 stitches into the fabric, needle down so it's holding my fabric. So now I can adjust this seam, make sure everything is lined up. My edges are perfectly aligned. And remember, all our units, because we trim them up with those rulers, they should all be exactly the same size. So if you have any part of a block that's sticking over, that's because it shifted with your sewing machine. So you want to make sure that we're keeping those edges totally perfectly aligned. With these FOF machines, it works so nicely because it has that IDT, which is like a built-in walking foot. So I don't have the shifting that other people might have. So let's just move this bottom block here. And I'm just going to grab my other tray.
We have a hello from Manitoulin and a hello from Valerie.
Hi,
A
Val.
person named Val. not a location.
So I'm just
are only hellos today.
only hellos today. I'm taking off my leader. I'm just going to cut those extra threads off there, and I'm going to stick it back in my machine. If I would have had some scrap fabric ready, I would have 2. So one can go in and one can go out at the end. So now it's ready to sew. Because I left those little spots joined up, I don't have to worry about getting any rows upside down. All I have to do now is press them in the direction I want to go. Or we can actually just do all the finger pressing at this point and then press the whole block after. But let's give this a little bit of pressing just so we can see. I'm going to turn it over upside down.
That is not a quilt.
Oh, this one. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to turn this upside down. Because this is a solid block, you can see that the seams want to go that way anyways. So why fight it? We're just going to make sure that the inside row presses towards the inside, and we want to butt these. So this top and the bottom row are going to press out. So we can take our fingers if we want. So this one's going to press in. And we can just finger press those. And then this one we want to press out. Because there's a seam there, it might want to fold back. So I do definitely like to give this a little bit of press with the iron. So I've got that one. I'm going to get that one. It's just a little awkward because they're sewn together, but it's going to keep us in the right direction. If you don't like this method, this is just another one of those methods that sometimes we use, sometimes we don't like them. It's your quilt, it's your quilting journey, and you're going to find what works good for you. So now I'm ready to go. Here's one of the hardest parts for people to learn is now when we put these together, we want to butt our seams. We have pressed specifically. Can you get in here? Give her a minute.
Okay, now here's the hard part. Don't move.
Okay. So you can see that on one side we have the seam going towards the left. The other side we have them going towards the right. It's going to reduce the bulk, but it's also going to be allow this seam to nest really, really nicely. When you nest them, you will learn the feel with your fingers. Right now I can feel a bump, so I know that it's overlapping. And if we take a little peek, I am just going to really like to have scissors. Here, just a minute. There. I'm just going to cut that seam because I just want to show you I could feel the lump, and if I peek inside, my seams are not nested. So I have to move that over. And now if I feel the lump, there's no lump, but there almost feels like a hole. And if I peek inside, again, they're not nested perfectly. So the way I like to nest them is I put them on top of each other. I can feel that little lump, and then I'll just slightly wiggle it back and forth until I can feel it smooth right out. And if we peek inside this time, there we go. They line up absolutely perfect. So once I have that lined up and my edges are flush, I am going to put a pin in my seam. I like to put the pin in the seam that is going towards the top of our machine and holding it in place. I am going to go to my second intersection, and I am again going to just wiggle those. I can feel that it's nested quite nicely. I'm going to hold that seam that's on the bottom, making sure that it's going in the right direction. I will also put a pin aligning up the edges. This block, here's a good place to stop for a minute. This block measures 8 inches right now. So it's a 7.5-inch finished block, but it measures 8 inches. So if you're trying to sew your 2 rows together and they don't fit perfectly, one of your seams is probably wrong. This is a big ruler. I just wanted to, we could always take a chance and we could measure this and make sure that we're ending up with exactly 8-inch units. If your row doesn't measure up to 8 inches, you can actually take it right now and fix those seams before we go any further.
Do not trim it down.
Do not trim it down. If we start trimming things down, then we're going to lose points and we're going to lose edges. Our sizes, they're not going to fit together when you go to butt them up against another block. We've tried so hard to keep these points at 1/4 inch away from the edge. We don't want to lose those. Clear as mud? Clear as mud. Okay, so now I have this seam that's all nicely pinned and it's ready to sew. I'm going to make sure that this corner is lined up perfectly. I'm going to take my 2 stitches. Now, even if I have pins in there, I don't just go pedal to the metal and sew all the way down. Anywhere that's in between the pins, your fabric can shift. So I really want to align up that edge of my top unit with the bottom unit. I want to make sure that everything is all nice and straight. I am going to go through. You can see there's a little bit of bulk there. I don't want to take my pin out and move that bulk. I just want it to stay exactly where it's supposed to be. I'm going to sew right up to my pin. Take my pin out. Sew past that seam allowance. Now that I've sewed past that seam on that side, I'm going to stop again, Make sure everything's lined up in between my next pin. Here's a really good spot. Can you see? Do you want me to take it out of the machine?
Okay, what?
Okay, so you can see my seams that are going across my blue fabric. I have a little intersection point. My 1/4 inch should end up right on that intersection. If it's over too high, then we're going to be cutting off our tips, or if it's too low, we're going to have too much fabric, too small of a seam. So when I see seams like that, I really want to make sure as another spot that I could aim towards that intersection and adjust a thread or so if I have to. Again, we do all that work to keep all those nice sharp points. We don't want to lose them. Okay. Here's our moment of truth. Just get that off of there. Put that in there. Ready? Are you ready? Let's see how it worked. Not too bad. This one's off just a smidgen. I don't think that that's going to bother me whatsoever. This one looks pretty darn close. If it was off more than that, I would definitely take it apart. I would take it apart probably from there to the end and make sure that that lined up a little bit better. But I'm not going to worry about that one too much. We're not exactly perfect. We just strive for perfection. So now we're going to go on to this last seam. Again, I am going to wiggle those and butt those up nice and tight. I am going to put one in right at the end. Again, I feel that seam down there, so I like to pin those seams in the right direction. There we go. It'll take some time for your fingers to feel that lump and to be able to just wiggle that, make sure that it lines up, but you'll get the hang of it. And there's my top. My iron is beeping. Okay, so I'm going to line that up perfectly. Butt it up to my needle. Locked it in. So just past my seam, I'm going to stop, realign that edge.
We also got a hello from Elliot Lake.
Hello, Elliot Lake. I've got my 2 seams that intersect, so I have that point that I'm going to aim towards. I'm just going to take my pin out, make sure it didn't shift. I think it did. There we go. Aiming for that spot, that intersection of my 2 seams. Aligning that. Lining my edges. Whoops. Just got to check that. I went a little crooked. Let me see how badly it went. Oh, we're okay. It looked worse on this side. If it did, because of the bulk of the seam, if it really went crooked, all I would have to do, because it went smaller, not larger, I could just take a new seam. And I guess I was off a little bit because my seam did not end up right totally on top of each other. So it did move. So I just reinforced that again with the stitching. Again, cut my leader off. Let's take a peek. Those ones are both perfectly on. So now these 2 rows, because we pressed these ones, these rows, we press them out. We can press these ones in. We can press them out. Some patterns will tell you to do it one way or the other because of what it's going to be butted up against. That being said, we don't have any seams that are butted up against us, so it really doesn't matter which way we're going to press it. So I can just press it to the one side. Here's a really good question, is some people will say, how come you don't open up the seams? Oh, I've got steam on here. Oops. Oh, look at it, wrinkled my fabric. Set my seam. I just felt that that corner was going in the wrong direction. There we go. You can open up your seams if you desire, but there's a couple buts that I believe in. It's, again, whether you want, it's your quilt, you do it the way you want. If I would have pressed these seams open, 2 things happen. First off, it's only if a seam is pressed open. Let me try to press a seam open here. If the seam is pressed open, the only thing in that intersection is the threads. So depending on what your batting is, sometimes batting can migrate through that hole. So you get those little fuzzies on your quilt. Secondly, you can no longer stitch in the ditch. There is no ditch. When we quilt our layers, stitching in the ditch, we would actually, you can feel that when it's pressed to the side, you can actually feel a little ridge. So we're just going to be sewing underneath the ridge. So you are sewing on fully piece of fabric. If we try to do it when the seams are pressed open, all you're going to be doing is sewing on top of threads. You also have a chance of your needle to actually hit the thread of the previous sewing, cutting it, and then you'd have a little hole in your quilt. So that's my theories on why I don't like to press open. Sometimes I do, because sometimes the block, you just have to. But I try not to. So now this block right here should measure 8 inches. Now I had lots of heavy steam on there, so let's hope it didn't warp it. So just to check my seam, I'm going to put my 8-inch line along the edge of my block. And I'm okay with that. There's absolutely perfectly aligned. I'm going to show you one little thing that some people might do. So my corner here is warped a little bit. Let's see if I can. Here. Okay, let's get the ruler up here. I can move it up here a little bit. Can you get in there?
I don't know if they can see that.
Okay. So right at this section here, my block did not quite fit to the edge. But if you look at this block, I have a little bit of fabric left here. That is because I had the steam on and it's warped it a little bit. So if I adjust this corner to go perfect and it lines up here, I can adjust those perfect, it lines up there. So I am not going to trim that block whatsoever. I'm not going to take it apart. When I sew this into my quilt, or when I sew it to my strips on the next one, it's going to straighten it back out again. It's just off that little bit, so it's going to be just fine. The only thing that some people might want to trim is if you have lots of threads hanging out, you can actually just cut, but you don't want to cut fabric. I just trimmed off some threads. All right, so that's step 1. Now we're going to take and we are going to sew borders on this. And because the inside block was a log cabin, we are going to sew the blocks on like a log cabin. So we're going to sew 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now remember, these are totally cut to size. So here's a good test with your seams. If I sew this first strip on, it should match exactly the width of my block. If it doesn't, that means some of my seams in my block are wrong or too big or too small. So we want to fix it at this point. So I'm going to put a couple pins in here. And normally I sew with the strip on top. This time I'm going to flip it over because now I can see all my seams, so I can make sure that they're going to be pressed in the right direction so that they don't fold over. And I can also see the intersections of my seams so I don't cut off those corners. So let's just slap that in there. I'll line that corner up perfectly. Again, I'm going to take a couple stitches. I'm going to let that needle go into the down position. It's my second hand or my third hand. Now I can go as far as I want to. I know this is an important spot, so I've made sure that it's lined up right to there. I can make sure the seams are going in the right direction, and I can aim for that little intersection. If it's off a little bit, if you have a thread or two less than the 1/4 inch, aim for that spot and it should work perfectly. Again, going to my next one, I'm just giving this a little tug because any bulk that's in there, I want to make sure that it's reduced. I could have pinned these if I wanted to. Hit that intersection. That wasn't lined up right, so that's why I took the pin out. I'm pushing to make sure that there's any bulk on that top piece. I want to make sure that it stays where it's supposed to be, that it doesn't slide. So I've hit those little intersections, and now at this stage, I want to press towards my strip. Going to the next one. Are we sewing it the same as that, or are we changing it?
You're doing it
The
the way
new
you
way?
want to.
Okay. There was just a little error on our pattern when we drew it. The seams for the log cabin go this way, this little block, and the seams on this one went in the opposite direction. So in my brain, that just throws me a little bit. I really want them to go in the same direction as my little squares. That being said, this piece here at the top.
So I am sorry about the pattern not having that right now. We just realized that today. That even made it through our sample.
Do you know, in all honesty, ladies, if you've already done it, I'm going to show you this because this is where I noticed it. You can see we sewed this one and then to that one. So it goes around this way. This one is sewn exactly the way the pattern was written, and it goes in the opposite direction. So if that ends up happening, you know, nobody's going to know except you, and nobody's ever going to pick it out.
It's not going to bother anyone except Cindy.
Yeah, sorry. It really, really, truly is. Okay. So what I want to do, and because it's the traditional layout of a log cabin that we always want to make sure they're spinning all in the same direction, when I go to sew my second strip on, I want to have the previously sewn strip on the top. So I am going to pin this now to this side. And I like to pin all the way down to my seam here. And I'm going to line up this edge. Again, so if it was a traditional log cabin block that you were just sewing strip around the strip around the strip, I would be sewing it in this direction. So my previously sewn strip would be on the top, at the top of the block, and then my strip goes onto the right-hand side. But only because we have all those points on the inside, I'm just going to flip this over. Some days I don't think I make total nonsense, but it's the way my brain works.
You didn't have your threads held, or you?
Oh, I didn't. I hope I don't have a
Did
rat's
it catch
nest.
the end?
It did catch. Aiming for that point. Yeah, I have a little bit of a rat's nest. And if you don't know what that is, I'll show you in a minute.
I'm pretty sure everyone knows what a rat's nest is. We've all made them.
Yeah. Do you know why they show up, though? You see? This could be their learning point. Okay. So where did we go? At the beginning, because I have control of those threads with my
Oh, that's not that bad.
no, it's not too bad. It did miss a stitch though. It's actually not caught right on the edge. So I really have to be careful that I'm making sure that either I fix that or that my next seam is going to make sure that we catch that.
And that happened because she was neither holding her threads nor did she put a leader in.
Exactly. And
You
that's
have to do one of those.
one
two
or the
things.
other. We have to control our thread ends. Yes. Again, I'm going to press. I'm going to finger press it open to where I want to. Because I'm missing a stitch there, I want to make sure that I don't stretch that edge. And I can see the little bit of wrinkles from the steam. So I think that was the edge that I squished a little bit, but it still fits absolutely perfect. So again, now I'm going to take my other 10.5-inch piece. It will fit on this side right here. Again, this was knowing that it's spinning in the proper direction. That piece that I just sewed on will be at the top, and I will press this over there. Just cut a thread. Cut a thread.
And if anyone is worried about that wrinkly piece of fabric, once we have this sewn into the quilt, and it's all completely stabilized, we will give it another steam, and those wrinkles will go away. But only after it's properly stabilized. Otherwise, we could cause further issues.
Exactly. Yes, the very last thing that we do is give everything a nice steam. If you're having a little bit of slippage stuff in your sewing machine, you could always take your 2 pins, because I've got my 2 edges. I've pinned where the seams are. I can give this a little stretch, and I can put another pin here, and that's going to keep those bulk. Remember, anytime that there's any little bit of excess fabric, we want to make sure it stays within our pins.
And by stretch, just to flatten it.
Just to flatten it, yeah. Make sure it's in there. And I always still pinning all the pins that I pinned. I've just sewn past my seam. I always want to stop when I sew past a seam and make sure everything else is aligned. If it's going to go crooked, it's going to go when you're sewing a seam. And just if it's off, just scratch it with your fingernail. Get it all back aligned up. Life will be good. again, we are going to press away from the center towards our strip that we just sewed on. And then we're ready to put our last piece on. And if we had those seams correctly, our strip should match exactly the size of our block. And here's another reason why I don't like the old method of doing log cabins, where you used to just take the long strips and sew your blocks on and then cut them apart. We never had that other fail safe. So our blocks, if they weren't quite sewn properly, they would start spinning and not being straight in the block. So this is why I always cut my pieces for my log cabins to the size that they are supposed to be, just to give me another fail safe to make sure that they're going to fit my block properly. I like everything nice and straight. Again, just giving it a little bit of a tug to lay it nice and flat. And I can put a pin in that center and hold it in there. One last seam. Let's get our leader in there. Got that corner perfect. Now let's get this edge. Whoops, dropped my purple thing. Oh, we might have missed that point a little bit. We'll have to check it from the other side. Again, aligned up. Everything's lined up. Sometimes as well, I just put a little bit of pressure on my fabric to make sure that it's all the two layers are laying nicely together. And there we go. Okay.
Push over so you can iron. Oh yes, we have to check
that little point. It's pretty closely on. I think we're going to be good. One thing to mention too right now, and this is coming from my mom, that your back is supposed to look as nice as your front. So before I'm going to press this, I got a few little threads from the previously sewn seam. I'm just going to nip those off. And I have a couple on this side as well. And that will keep my back looking as nice as the front. But here's a little thing though too. Because my background is so light, those threads may show up after I'm quilting it, and they may show up and color through it after it's quilted. So you don't want to see those threads on the back. So I'm going to listen to my mom and make sure my backs look just as good as the fronts. Moment of truth. Oh, I did lose that point just a teeny tiny little bit. But am I okay with it?
I don't know. I might make you unpick it.
This one's perfect. That one's fine. Okay, everybody, let me know. Should I unpick it?
You probably only have to unpick a few inches.
I would only have to unpick there. I've got a couple threads here that have just come up from the seam allowance. I am going to want to again make sure that they are trimmed off. If I would have remembered my scissors, I could use that. I could also use my rotary cutter.
I don't know how to make a pole.
A pole? Leave it. I've got I don't know if you can see on the camera. Can you see right here? There's a really weird bump. I'm thinking my seam isn't pressed properly. So I'm just going to go back and I am going to just give that another little press. There we go. I don't know about you, but I'm happy with the way the block turned out. Those wrinkles, they're going to go away after. Now, the block itself at this point should be measuring 12.5 inches. So let's find out.
I figured out how to add a pole.
Thanks, Tiff. Okay. So I've got my 12.5 inch line on these two edges that I can see perfectly. And I am okay. There's a little bit out here. I'm not going to trim it off though. I'm just going to leave it because again, it doesn't quite meet here. So it's just shifted a little bit once it's sewn into my quilt and then everything's pressed and steamed really nicely. We're not going to notice that at all. But I don't want to cut that off because then the block's actually going to be too small. So there we have it. I have one more block to, one more star to sew together for the lap size. Again, 6 for the double or 9 for the queen. And then we will see you next week.
Where we will need the corner beam ruler next week.
We will need the corner beam ruler.
Or we highly recommend the corner beam ruler.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't have a corner beam ruler, there is one way that we can do it in one other way that we're going to explain how to do it. But
it's easier.
I really much rather, in all honesty, that is one of the units. That's the star point on the large star. The corner points, that is one unit that I don't want to make unless I can use that ruler. It just makes everything so much easier, so less of a struggle. So we will find out whether I have to undo my star point. And I will let you know.
It's a 50-50 poll. Guys, hurry up and get your votes in. We've got 15 people watching. It can't be 50-50 if all of you vote. Oh.
Okay, so anyways, thanks for joining us today. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe. YouTube loves it when you do that. And check out, I want to see all these blocks made and up on our Facebook group. I want to see the colors finally coming together. It's pretty exciting.
The name of our Facebook group?
And the name of our Facebook group, of course, is the Cindy B's Sew Along 2023. So not my normal page, but the Sew Along Facebook group.
Hopefully this stream went better this time. We shouldn't have had any lags on our internet this time, so we should be good. And super exciting news. Fiber Op should be available at our shop by the end of the summer.
We're hoping.
So hopefully our streams will be better from then on.
But we will just keep muddling through the best that we can until that point happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're looking at 67% is unpicked.
Okay, fine. I'm unpicking it. So I will post this on the Facebook page that the corner is actually fixed. Have my seam ripper handy, and I am going to unpick. Bye, everybody. Happy sewing.